So, for those of you that have crossed the pond just to be here, I'll explain to you where we're at. We've been going through Grace and Truth in the Gospel of John for several years now, off and on. But that's all right. And last week we talked about John chapter 5 and the use of judgment in the Gospel of John. And what we found was that how judgment works is that the light shines, and then you determine whether or not you want to be in the light or out of the light. And so as we went through all the statements about Jesus being the judge, and at the same time him saying, I don't condemn you, you're already condemned by the law, what happens is that people recognize the light and turn away from it. And there was two verses in particular that we talked about. We're going to be picking up on this theme again. John chapter 1, verse 5. Remember that introductory section of the Gospel of John, those first 17 verses, which is a summation. And this is right in verse 5, right at the very beginning, where he says, in him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shineth in the darkness, and of course the light is the Lord Jesus Christ. And the darkness comprehended it not. So the darkness did not understand the light. And then in John chapter 3, verse 190, yeah, that's right. That's right. It's the long chapter. You never want to give that one on a Sunday morning. This is the condemnation, that light has come into the world, and men loved darkness rather than light because their deeds were evil. And so you have two sort of aspects of the same thing. You've got a lack of comprehension, and then you've got rejection. And in both cases, it's darkness. So here's the thing about darkness. There is no shades of darkness. If you want to sit on the sidelines and sit in the shade and not look at the light, you're in the darkness. You're not in the shade. There is no grays. Now we have grays in our life because I'm a sinner and you're a sinner, and you have to accept my shades of gray, and I have to accept your shades of gray. But when it comes to salvation, when it comes to the light that shines, there's no gray area. But oftentimes, when we are here, we don't recognize here. So we don't comprehend it. And what's going to happen is, if you open up, I think it's the next verse I have. Is it the next verse I have? I say, is it the next verse I have? I say, is it the next verse? Come on. Yeah. John 15, verse 23 through 24. This is Jesus talking to his disciples about light and darkness and about how it works. And he said, and about this idea of not comprehending. And he says, if I had not come and spoken unto them, they had not sinned. But now they have no cloak for their sin. That hateth me, hateth my Father also. If I had not done among them the works which none other men did. Yeah, I get rid of that. They had not sinned, but now have they both seen and hated both me and my Father. So what he's saying is, if they didn't understand, then they wouldn't have sin. So we're talking about light and darkness. So the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness doesn't comprehend it. And so Jesus says, I have to make sure that they comprehend that this is light and this is darkness. Because a lot of times we don't comprehend what is light and what is darkness. And so Jesus says, I'm going to show you what the light is, and then you have no out. This is what this is saying. You have no out once you see the light. And we talked about that with the story of Nicodemus, and how Nicodemus had to learn that the group that he was involved in, the Pharisees, were evil. And he found it as he went through that process of recognizing that, first of all, they didn't just have their facts wrong, but their intentions were wrong. And so what we have is we have people in Israel who don't quite understand whether or not what the light is and what the darkness is. And Jesus says, I had to come and show them. And so that's what he does. And so I want us to open up to John chapter 7, which is where we're going to pick up this morning. And we're going to see between John chapter 7 and John chapter 8, we won't get to John chapter 8 today, I don't think. But when we consider what goes on in John chapter 7, this is exactly what we're going to see. We're going to see people start to recognize the light and then start to have to make a determination for themselves whether or not they want to be in the light or be in the darkness. Because remember, you're only in one of two places. You're either in the darkness or you're in the light. And a lot of times when you're in the darkness, you don't recognize how dark the darkness is, right? It's like the great line about Mussolini back in the 1930s. Well, at least the trains ran on time, right? Meanwhile, he was oppressing the people. Everybody, certainly the Germans in Germany back in the 1930s, when Hitler and the Nazi Party were blaming the Jews for everything, weren't thinking in their heads, oh, you know what we ought to do? We ought to just exterminate them. That's not what they were thinking. What they were thinking was, oh, I've got somebody I can blame? Great. Why not blame the Jews? Yeah, they do have money and la, 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 la. And they don't recognize how dark the darkness is. And so what the light does is the light shines and exposes the darkness. It doesn't accuse the darkness. The darkness accuses itself. And that's what we're going to see in John chapter 8 and John chapter 9, Lord willing. So let's pick it up right at the beginning of John chapter 7 and 8, rather, not 8 and 9. And we're going to start off with a very interesting and I think a peculiar statement. It says in John chapter 7, verse 1, after these things, Jesus walked in Galilee, for he would not walk in Jewry, because the Jews sought to kill him. So why didn't Jesus go to is it Jewry? Is that what it says? Judea, and the King James says Jewry, but Judea. So why didn't he go? Huh? He does. Which King James do you have?
Some of them say Jewry.
I'm going to break some. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. So the reason Jesus didn't go down to Judea is because he was afraid of being killed. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Makes no sense. Think about it. That's what it sounds like. You're absolutely right. That's exactly what it sounds like, but that makes no sense. Now, why does that make no sense?
He knew the plan from the beginning.
Exactly. He knew when he was going to die. He's going to go to the Feast of Tabernacles. He's not going to die at the Feast of Tabernacles. He's going to die at the Passover. This is the same man that in Nazareth, they went to toss him off the cliff, and he just walked right through him because his time had not yet come. He knew he wasn't going to die. In fact, in this story itself, he says, I'm not going to go there, or the implication is that he's saying, I'm not going to go there because if I go there, there's going to be people who are going to try to kill me. Now, there are going to be people that are going to that want to kill him, no doubt about it. But he's not afraid of being killed. He goes there right away. It's only within a few verses that he's right there in the middle of the temple preaching. So then the question we ask is, well, then why does it say this? If he's not afraid to die because he's not going to die. And why does it say that he stays in Galilee? Because the Jews sought to kill him. The Jews were seeking to kill him. Let's first of all, let's determine who the Jews are. Because we know in John's Gospel that this expression, the Jews, is used 20-something times. And so who do they represent? And we said they represented those who are antagonistic to Jesus. But let's narrow that down a little bit. So he stays in Galilee because the Jews aren't in Galilee, right? Because the Jews are in Judea. And that's...
The elders, right?
Huh?
The elders.
It's not just the elders, it's the people of Judea. It's the mentality of the Jews in Judea is what it is. Yeah, it includes the Pharisees and the scribes and the rulers and all of those. But there's a mentality in Judea that is in conflict with the Lord Jesus Christ. And we talked about this when we were talking about the kings. Remember when we talked about the lion, and the liar? That the Jews down in Judea were very self-righteous. They had been that way for centuries, and it was part of the character. Now, I'm not casting every single person that was in Judea, obviously not. And John's Gospel doesn't either, because John's Gospel separates the Jews from the people. So when he talks about the people who are trying to work this out, he calls them the people. When he talks about those who are strictly antagonistic to Jesus, he calls them the Jews. And these are the self-righteous down in Judea. The people in Judea were extremely religious. That's why they liked the Pharisees so much, because the Pharisees were ultra-religious. And their religion was based upon getting closer and closer and closer to God through sinning less and less and less. And of course, the reality is you don't get closer and closer to God by sinning less and less and less. But that's the mentality. And so the Jews in Judea throughout history were always very religious. The Jews up in the north, back with the Old Kingdom, they were wild and crazy guys, right? And so the law and the study of the law and the intensity of all those studies all take place down in Judea. And as a result of it, the people down there looked down on everybody else. literally everybody else. They certainly looked down on the Samaritans, but even the people in Galilee, they were less religious, they were less believers, they were not as faithful as they were because they weren't totally dedicated to the law. They had fishermen, they're this, they're that, they're doing all that. They're not as intense about it as we are. And Jesus was almost instantaneously antagonistic to that. Because first of all, he was from Galilee. Right? He was seen as somebody from Galilee. Well, nobody from Galilee is going to know all this stuff better than those of us who are down here studying it all the time. But Jesus did. Secondly, he called out their hypocrisy, their self-righteousness. Right? And those great woes when he talks about the scribes and Pharisees, he's talking about Jewry. He's talking about the mentality that you wash the outside of the bowl and inside is all dead men's bones. It's all superficial. It's all for show. And they didn't think it for show. They thought it was bringing them closer and closer and closer to God. And so the Jews hated him virtually from the beginning. They hated him for it. But you have all these other people as well who are trying to figure out, well, these people are really religious. These people are really dedicated. And along comes this guy, and he starts saying things, well, we don't really know who this guy is. And so there's this conflict going on. And what Jesus is going to do is he's going to expose the light. And then once he exposes the light, you've got to make a determination. So what is light and what is darkness? And so that's that. And so the reason he doesn't go down into Judea is this. He's not going to allow the Jews to dictate how these events take place. If he goes down there and they try to kill him, then the people who are lost in the darkness are not going to know where the light is when the determination is trying to be made to kill him. In other words, the Jews are going to make you pick a side because they want to kill Jesus. And you've got to pick a side, and you don't even know what the right side is yet. And Jesus says, no. I'm going to dictate how these events play out. It's my job to dictate it. I'm not going to give them the advantage by all of a sudden just showing up and letting them push the issue. And so he doesn't allow them to push the issue. So he stays in Galilee until the time comes when he's going to dictate, which of course happens at the Feast of Tabernacles. He's going to dictate how these events play out. So that's why he stays in Jewry, not because he was afraid to die. Verse 2. Now the Jews' Feast of Tabernacles was at hand. Now notice it says the Jews' Feast of Tabernacles. Why does it say the Jews' Feast of Tabernacles and not just the Feast of Tabernacles? Any guesses? Any thoughts? It would also say the same thing about the Jews' feast that we discovered in John 5 was Pentecost, when he heals the impotent man. We looked at that and thought it was Pentecost, but it was called the Jews' feast. Why did it say the Jews' feast?
They're the only ones that did it?
Partially, but also because take Pentecost for instance. When was Pentecost? Pentecost took place. When did it take place?
50 days after unleavened bread.
Acts chapter 2, right? Pentecost is in Acts chapter 2. That's the Lord's Pentecost. Was in Acts chapter 2. This celebration is a Jewish celebration. Oftentimes we'll see the word the Jewish Passover. When was the Jewish Passover? When was the real Passover? Well, you could argue that there were two real Passovers, right? There was the actual Passover with the lintel on the doorway, and then there was the sacrifice of Christ, the ultimate Passover, right? But there were several Passovers in between that were just celebrations. And so here we have the Jews' Feast of Tabernacles. So in other words, what the Jews' Feast of Tabernacles is going to be all about, that's what this is all about. This is how the Jews celebrated the Feast of Tabernacles. But this is not the Feast of Tabernacles. When was the Feast of Tabernacles?
I would say yet to come.
Yeah, it hadn't happened yet. We won't look at it. It's in Zechariah 14. Explains when the Feast of Tabernacles comes. It happens because the Feast of Tabernacles is a harvest festival, and the harvest isn't done. So there has not been a Feast of Tabernacles. That's why that sort of question that people have: why do they celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles in the Kingdom Age? Because that's when the Feast of Tabernacles actually takes place. It hasn't actually taken place yet. The Feast of Tabernacles.
December Sunday school class.
Oh, so that's why he's answering all the questions.
It's only October.
Sorry.
This is
Well,
my topic, so
yeah,
stay off.
but October is when the Feast of Tabernacles takes place.
So this is a man-made
Well, yeah.
Twist on it?
This is how the Jews are celebrating this. I mean, they're told to celebrate this every single year.
Yeah.
No doubt about it. But this is how the Jews are going to celebrate it. That's why it says the Jews. Remember, the Jews are antagonistic to Christ. So this is the Jews' Feast of Tabernacles. It's not the Lord's Feast. Now, yes, there's the ultimate Feast of Tabernacles, but they were told to celebrate it every single year. But there's two ways to celebrate it, the Lord's way and your way. And this is going to be their way. And it's a great feast, by the way. It's a marvelous thing, spectacular thing that they do. So, okay, so the Jews' Feast of Tabernacles is at hand. And then he brings the brethren in. And again, I think the reason he brings the brethren in here, the reason why the brethren are mentioned here, is to reiterate what Jesus is saying, what's being said in verse 1 when it says he doesn't go down to Jewry. Because look what his disciples say. His disciples therefore said unto him, Depart hence and go into Judea, that thy disciples also may see the works that thou doest. For there is no man that doeth anything in secret, for he himself seeketh to be known openly. If thou do these things, show thyself to the world. For neither did his brethren believe in him. So one of the interesting things about this is all of a sudden his brethren are introduced. Now, his brethren aren't introduced, to my knowledge, at all in John's gospel up to this point. His mother is. Remember, his mother's at the wedding in Cana. But his brethren are not mentioned. And then all of a sudden here, his brethren are put in. His brothers, James and Jude and the others. So why are they mentioned here? And they're not mentioned again either in John's gospel that I can think of. So why are they mentioned here, and what does it mean that it says they did not believe on him? So do you think that his brothers, his people in his family did not know that Jesus was the Christ? And we talked about that, if you remember, those of you that remember my exhortations as if they were given yesterday. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, yes.
We talked about this in an exhortation about James. Right? And we talked about, would you as a family have your oldest son be the Christ and you wouldn't know about it? And why would it be kept hidden? We talked about the same thing when we talked about John the Baptist. And the fact that John the Baptist clearly knew Jesus. He just didn't know the Christ. But he knew Jesus was the Christ. He just didn't know what the Christ was. He thought he did, but he didn't. But if you're in your family, I mean, it's a family, right? And you're raising a family, and the oldest son in the family is the Son of God. Well, I mean, there are white elephants in the room, but that's a really big one, isn't it? I mean, there's no way you could. Well, first of all, eventually they can do the math, right? They're not, maybe when they're little, but eventually they're gonna be able to go, when exactly was your wedding day? And you know what I mean? It has to be explained. And you would explain it as a reasonable parent. If you're raising this Messiah, you can't keep the rest of the family in the dark about it. So that can't be what that means. So what does it mean that they didn't believe on him? Well, we talked about that also in the exhortation about James. They weren't happy with Jesus for I think two reasons. First of all, now you're James and you're the brother of Jesus and you're growing up and your brother's the Messiah and eventually he's going to, you're thinking, probably take power. You're thinking you're in pretty good shape. Right? And then he chooses his disciples. And he doesn't choose you. What do you mean he doesn't choose me? I'm the closest kin he's got. And on top of it, he chooses your cousins and doesn't choose you. And I think there's a lot of jealousy. And it actually comes out in the way that they express this, that there's a lot of sort of, you think you're some big shot kind of thing. Remember, they wouldn't have known that the Messiah was sinless, that the Messiah made no mistakes. Right? Your brothers, those of you that have brothers, they don't think you're perfect. Luckily, Butchie didn't have any brothers because then they would struggle. Right? Right? But they wouldn't have thought Jesus was perfect, even though he was. And if they said he was perfect, it would have been, oh yeah, he's perfect, that guy. He never done anything wrong. Mom accepts everything he does. I had a brother like that, actually, so I know. So they also thought, wait a minute, this guy's not doing it the way it should be done. Right? Because remember that later on, in another point, they tried to take him away because they thought, well, this is out of control. He's completely lost control. And so what they're saying is here is they're saying, oh, you're trying to make yourself into a big shot. Which Jesus was a big shot. He wasn't making himself into a big shot. He simply was. But they're jealous for it. But ask yourself this question. When his brethren said to him, why don't you go down to Jerusalem if you're going to be a big shot? Why don't you go down there? Because that's where it has to be done. Do you think that they were saying, you know what, there's people down there that want to kill him. Let's convince him to go down there. That'll solve it. Do you think that's what his brethren were doing? Of course not. Of course not. But darkness is darkness. And you're told they're in the darkness right there, right? You're told it right away because they said, because his brethren did not believe on him. There's light and there's darkness. Now they're in the darkness. But they don't know in the darkness that what they're saying means something else. Again, at least the trains ran on time, right? Sometimes you're in the darkness and you don't recognize what the darkness is. Because notice what, and just to show it, notice what Jesus says to them. And Jesus said unto them, my time is not yet come, but your time is always ready. The world cannot hate you, but it hateth me because I testify of it, that the works thereof are evil. So what Jesus says is, you're with them, and they're evil. He's trying to open up their heads. You're saying to me, I should go there. You can go there tomorrow. And you know, when I was thinking about this, it's interesting. All through the period of time where Jesus was going to be persecuted and his disciples were fearful for themselves because they could easily get grabbed as well. Remember Lazarus? They wanted to grab Lazarus and kill him. You never hear about his brothers being in danger, right? Think about some political powerful person. Even in the Bible, it happens a lot of times where somebody wants to kill somebody, so they take it out on the family. Yet we never hear anything about the Pharisees or anybody else that hates Jesus taking it out on his family. And Jesus explains why right here. He says, the world cannot hate you, but me it hateth, because I testify it that the works thereof are evil. He's saying, you're with them. And right now they were. They don't stay with them. Obviously, James becomes a pillar of the church. James comes into the light, is what he does. But right here, right now, you're with them. You can go to the feast. You'll fit right in at the feast. Am I stealing everything, Jim?
No, no, my comment is about all of them, even the 12, the 11. Even after the resurrection, they're all wandering around. They're disappointed. The two on the road to Emmaus, we thought he was going to be our king. Peter with the sword in the garden, even all the way until they meet and Jesus says, you need to go fish for men, Peter.
Right.
Nobody understood what
right, they're still struggling. Right. Verse 8. Go you up unto this feast. I go not up yet unto this feast, for my time is not yet full come. So he said, you go ahead. You can go. I can't, because they testify that I testify that their works are evil. You're not testifying that their works are evil. You're not standing in the light. But I am. Verse 9. When he said these words, he then abode still in Galilee. But when his brethren were gone up, then went he also up unto the feast, but not openly, as it were, in secret. So he's not going to just expose himself and then allow other people to dictate what they think should happen to him. He's going to control the events. And he's going to control the events in a way that he dictates who hears what, when they hear it, and how.
So what you're saying is he's already testified against the Jews and he's leaving them alone to think about it while he's in Galilee?
I think he's wandering in Galilee waiting for the opportunity to testify of what's going on and how it's going on. And the reason why he chooses the Feast of Tabernacles, by the way, and we'll get into the Feast of Tabernacles shortly, is because the Feast of Tabernacles was a harvest feast. And the Feast of Tabernacles was a celebration. And nothing bad or evil or whatever is supposed to take place in the Feast of Tabernacles. The Feast of Tabernacles is about everybody together, coming together and standing as one. And we're all going to stand as one in praise to God. How you praise God, that's what they get wrong. But that's what the Feast of Tabernacles is all about. We're all going to stand together. We're all in this together. We're all on the same team. We're all together on this, and we're all going to stand together and celebrate God's goodness and mercy. And he's going to stand out on the side as we know. And that's when people are going to go, hey, wait a minute. But again, he's going to pick the moment to expose that. And then the Jews, I don't think he's going to convince at all. But he will start to convince the people, who are those who are intermixed with the Jews, who don't really know what right and wrong is. And that's the debate we're going to see take on just 1 second. So verse 11. Then the Jews sought him at the feast and said, where is he? Just like his brethren said, hey, you got to go there. You know, you have to be there. That's where people like you go. And so the Jews, again, notice that it says the Jews were looking for him. And there was much murmuring among the people concerning him, for some said, and notice that word murmuring too, he is a good man. And others said, nay, but he deceiveth the people. So you can see the conflict, right? And it says people. It doesn't say the Jews. It doesn't say some Jews said this and some Jews said that. It says some people said this. Some people said, oh, he's a good man. And others said, no, he's a deceiver. So what is he? Is he a good man or is he a deceiver? Well, we know what he is, but they don't. The people are in the process of working up. But notice it says that they're murmuring about this. Howbeit, it says, no man spoke openly of him for fear of the Jews. So here's the thing. You're afraid of the Jews. So you don't speak openly about this, but the Jews have one argument and Jesus has another. And you're trying to figure out what right and wrong is. But you're not afraid of Jesus, but you're afraid of the Jews. Is it?
It's in your brown coat.
It can't be in my brown coat. And my phone doesn't ring like that. I think it's yours.
Mine's right here.
Oh, okay. Anyway, moving on. So you can see this debate going on, right? Now, about the midst of the feast, Jesus went up into the temple and taught. So let's talk about the feast and what the Feast of Tabernacles was. So there were three main feasts the year that people had to go to, were mandatory to go to. There was Passover in the spring, and then there was first fruits or trumpets or Pentecost 7 weeks later. If I get that, no, 50 weeks later, because there's the 50, right? 50 days. 50 days later, thank you. So it's just over 7 weeks. Thank you very much. 50 days later, and then there was the Feast of Tabernacles at the harvest time, right after the Day of Atonement. So those are the three main feasts you have to go to. And Tabernacles is the third and final feast of the year. Now, I want us to open up to Leviticus, chapter. Let me just get the right chapter. 23. We're going to learn a little bit about the Feast of Tabernacles. Leviticus chapter 23, and we're going to pick it up in verse 34. We're going to read verse 34 through 36, and then we'll pick it up again in 39. So verse 34 says, Speak unto the children of Israel. This is obviously the Lord speaking to Moses, saying, The 15th day of this 7th month shall be the Feast of Tabernacles for 7 days unto the Lord. On the first day shall be a holy convocation. You shall do no servile work therein. 7 days you shall offer an offering made by fire unto the Lord. On the 8th day shall be a holy convocation unto you. And you shall offer an offering made by fire unto the Lord. It is a solemn assembly, and you shall do no servile work. So notice there's 8 days. Skip down to verse 39, because that's where it picks up again. Also on the 15th day of the 7th month, when you have gathered in the fruit of the land, you shall keep a feast unto the Lord 7 days. On the first day shall be a Sabbath, and on the 8th day shall be a Sabbath. And ye shall take you on the first day the boughs of goodly trees, branches of palm trees, and boughs of thick trees, and willows of the brook, and ye shall rejoice before the Lord your God 7 days. And ye shall keep it a feast unto the Lord 7 days in the year. It shall be a statute forever in your generations. Ye shall celebrate it in the 7th month. Ye shall dwell in booths 7 days. All that are in Israel born shall dwell in booths, that your generation may know that I made the children of Israel to dwell in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. And Moses declared unto the children of Israel the feasts of the Lord. So there's three key elements to the Feast of Tabernacles. First of all, it was a harvest festival. It was a celebration of the harvest. A harvest comes in. The whole point about harvest is the fact that God is the guy that provides the sun and the rain. It's all about God's provision. And so at the end of the year, you have a harvest festival. Just like almost every agrarian society would have a harvest festival. The second thing is that they dwell in booths to remember the Exodus. So they build these things called a sukkot, which is actually, I should have gotten a better picture, but this is a small little booth that they still do it to this day, by the way. And you would live for 7 days in this booth. These days, they actually seldom live in it. They just have meals or prayer sessions inside the booth. But they're actually supposed to live in it for 7 days. And here's the reason why they're supposed to live in it, supposed to build these booths and live in it in 7 days. Because when the Lord took them out of Egypt, he took everybody out of Egypt together. He didn't pick and choose who was getting taken out of Egypt. He took everybody out, and it didn't matter whether you were the richest or the poorest person. It didn't matter whether you were the holiest or the biggest sinner. It made no difference. The Lord took everybody out, and everybody dwells in booths. Now think about that. That's different than the Passover. Because in the Passover, you had to go and you had to put blood on the lentil. Otherwise, the Lord didn't pass over, right? So the Passover is about your sins. That's what Jesus' redemption is all about. It's about the forgiveness of your sins. It's your need for redemption. The Feast of Tabernacles is different. The Feast of Tabernacles is strictly about the goodness and mercy of God. It's like, remember in another class we were talking about, I don't know why my old classes are coming in, the difference between a sincere faith and an enlightened faith. A sincere faith looks down to the ground and says, "Oh, wretched man that I am," and then looks up to God for redemption. And that is a part of faith. But an enlightened faith looks up to God and what he's doing, and then recognizes from what he's doing what's going on down here. And the Feast of Tabernacles is much like that. Remember, the Day of Atonement, which is all about forgiveness for sins, happens right before the Feast of Tabernacles. The Feast of Tabernacles is after the Day of Atonement. It's after the point where you're forgiven. Now what? And now what you do is you bring glory and honor to God. And he says, I want you to dwell in booths for 7 days so you recognize that everybody was in the same state. Whether you've only sinned once or you're the greatest sinner of all time, you're in the same state. But whether you were in one state or another state, I brought you all out together. Everybody came out together. Nobody was, well, you come out, but you stay over there, and you come out and you sit right here. There was none of that. That's what the booths represent. We're all in the same place. Just like, was it Romans 7, if I remember correctly. We're all in the same place. That was the whole message of the Feast of Tabernacles. Because the Feast of Tabernacles is about what God has done, not what you have needed. Does that make sense? And the third thing is that praise for his goodness and mercy. That's what it's all about. It's about a recognition that this is all God's plan and purpose, and that he gets all the honor and glory. So that's what the Feast of Tabernacles should be about. It should be about everything about who God is and what God is, and not about who I am and what I need. And the festival that they have, which we're going to look at probably next week at this point, was supposed to be a celebration of all that things, of all those things. And yet if all those things are true, the center of the feast should be the Lord Jesus Christ. And yet when he stands up in the feast and says, "He who is thirsty, come unto me," he's standing separate from the celebration that they're doing. And yet he's at the heart of the Feast of Tabernacles. He's at the heart of the glorification of God. And yet he's going to be rejected because of the way he stands up at the Feast of Tabernacles. Because they think they're worshiping one way, and they're actually worshiping another way. Now, one of the people that understood, and I guess we'll finish up with him. One of the people that understood what the Feast of Tabernacles was all about was Solomon. Because this is what Solomon did. I think I saved the verses. When Solomon... Yeah, that's that.
2 Chronicles 8.
Yeah, that's that. Okay, well, there's a nice picture of Solomon dedicating the temple. So he does two things. We'll pull up the verses. Let me find them in my my notes. Solomon, here we go. Turn over to 1 Kings chapter 6, verse 37. 1 Kings. And this is the How many years did Solomon build the temple? 7. It took Solomon 7 years to build the temple. 1 Kings chapter 6. Chapter 6 and verse 37. And this is Solomon building the temple. Let me know when you're there. 37. 1 Kings chapter 6, verse 37. In the 4th year was the foundation of the house of the Lord laid in the month Ziph. In the 11th year, so that's 7 more years, in the month Bul, which is the 8th month, was the house finished throughout all the parts thereof, and according to all the fashion of it. So was he 7 years in building it. So he finished it in the 11th year on the 8th month, right? Now turn over to 1 Kings chapter 8 and verse 1. Then Solomon assembled the elders of Israel and all the heads of the tribes, the chiefs of the fathers of the children of Israel, unto King Solomon in Jerusalem, that they might bring up the ark of the covenant unto the Lord out of the city of Zion, out of the city of David, which is Zion. All the men of Israel assembled themselves unto King Solomon at the feast of the month of Ethanim, which is in the 7th month, and this is where he dedicates the temple. So he finishes the building of the temple in the 8th month, and then he dedicates the temple in the 7th month. What does that mean? That means after he finished it, he waited 11 months before he dedicated it. That's how important it was to him to dedicate it on the Feast of Tabernacles. It had to be on the Feast of Tabernacles. So that means that whole next year, when they celebrated the Passover, when they celebrated the Pentecost, when they celebrated all these other feasts, the temple sat there not being used because Solomon wasn't going to dedicate and open that temple until it was on the Feast of Tabernacles. So why does he wait for the Feast of Tabernacles? Because the temple was all about God dwelling with men, not about men's need for God. Now, we do need God. And when he gives his prayer, he says to God, forgive us when we do this, and forgive us when we do this, and forgive us when we do this. Why? Because you are great, and because your mercy endures forever. Because of who you are, forgive us. And so Solomon says, we're going to do this on the Feast of Tabernacles because this temple is not going to be about our need for a temple. It's going to be about God's willingness to come and dwell with us. And so let's take a quick look before we finish at what happens, because I love this part of the story. And actually, this is a good place to end. Because what we want to do is go over to Chronicles. And it's the corresponding account in 2 Chronicles chapter 6 and verse 1. And Solomon has given his great prayer of dedication. I'm sorry, 2 Chronicles 7 and verse 1. Now when Solomon had made an end of praying, the fire came down from heaven and consumed the burnt offering and sacrifices, and the glory of the Lord filled the house. So you have this spectacular event where the fire comes down from heaven as he finishes prayer, and everybody's there, and as he finishes his prayer, the fire comes shooting down from heaven and consumes the sacrifice. I mean, just this doesn't happen every day, Chauncey. You know what I'm saying? This is just an incredible event. And the priest could not enter into the house of the Lord because the glory of the Lord had filled the house of God. So not only did you have the fire coming down, but you had intense, massive light, the glory of the Lord, right? The Shekinah glory, 10 times stronger than, more light than the light of the sun. And when all the children saw how the fire had come down and the glory of the Lord upon the house, they bowed themselves on their faces to the ground upon the pavement and worshiped and praised the Lord, for he is good, for his mercy endureth forever. So this is their response to what happens here, to this incredible event. the response is they fall down on their knees, and it says they're saying, the Lord is good, his mercy endures forever. So, the Lord is now in his holy temple. And they fall down on their knees, saying the Lord is good, his mercy endures forever. What's the conflict there? The Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. If you look at that word saying, it'll be in my Bible, it's in italics because it doesn't say saying. It just says, the Lord is good, his mercy endures forever. That's the message. Whether or not they were saying it, we'll take a look at that next week. But that was what they were doing. They fell down on their knees. The Lord is good, his mercy endures forever. That's the message of the Feast of Tabernacles. That the Lord is good and that his mercy endures through everything for those who believe, who come into the light. And we'll stop there. Next week we'll take a look at the end of chapter 7 here and the things that Jesus says, the different parts of the ceremony of the Feast of Tabernacles, the water ceremony, the lighting ceremony, and then we'll take a look at the story of the adulterous woman, Lord willing. Any questions before we close? No?